I'm Jessica Knapp from Canada's History Society. Come with me behind the scenes at the Manitoba Museum with Dr. Amelia Fay, the curator of the Hudson's Bay Company Museum Collection, and Dr. Randy Moy, curator of zoology, to look at some of the artifacts and specimens that did not make it into their Legacies of Confederation exhibit. So where are we?
We're in the lab for the Hudson's Bay Company Museum Collection. So we have a really nice big bright lab, and it's where we often put artifacts and specimens out for planning an exhibit. And so we thought we'd bring you here today to show you some of the things that didn't make it into the exhibit.
The Manitoba Museum includes both human artifacts and natural history specimens in their collections. Even though the specimens Randy showed me had interesting stories to tell, they were ultimately left out of the exhibit because they were either not collected in Manitoba or they were not considered as spectacular as the other specimens. People find the pronghorn really interesting because their antlers have a sheath that is replaced every year. This sheath is made out of the same material as our fingernails. This little guy is a Baird Sparrow. Their numbers in Manitoba have significantly declined in the last 50 years. This specimen was collected in 1935 from Stony Mountain, and the nest was collected in 1930 from St. Charles. The Longbilled Curlew was primarily hunted on the East Coast, but their breeding ground was actually on the prairies. The species disappeared from Manitoba in the 1950s, and only a handful have been spotted in the province since then. This is a hint to the massive changes that occurred through agriculture. How do you prepare a specimen like this for your collection and/or for display?
When the bird comes in, it's essentially turned inside out. The guts are taken out. The skull and obviously the bill are left with the bird, along with some bones in the wings and the feet. So once those internal organs are taken out, we can actually determine what sex the bird is if they're difficult to tell. Once they're turned inside out, we can also figure out what age they might be by looking at the skull. The bird then is stuffed to look more or less like the bird. Frequently a stick is stuck through into the head and then back through the body to give it some solidity. And then it's put in a dryer and dried so that they can be stored long term. From those internal organs that we take out, we can also look at gut contents, figure out what they're eating. We can look for parasites. Eggs like this are also very important to have in the collection because you can do isotope analyses on them, figure out, you can get a baseline from the environment as to what sort of chemicals might have been around. So you can see, for instance, some of the early studies of pesticides. We can see when they started to get used in certain areas. And even feather collections from some of these birds, you can figure out where they migrate to or from, and where they spend the winter.
Wow. Learning about the preparation of specimens was fascinating, but I also wanted to know about the tough decisions Amelia had to make for the human history artifacts.
These are connected to the Inkster family. So, if you're in Winnipeg, Inkster Boulevard, that name is very familiar to a lot of people. And these likely belong to Colin Inkster, who was sheriff of Manitoba in 1876, and he was sheriff for over 50 years.
Whoa.
Yeah, so he was a very prominent Manitoban and a very important figure during that early period, just leading up and just after Confederation. And so he definitely played an important role as one of our early political leaders in the province. So this particular piece here it's a wall pocket, and no one has wall pockets anymore, but essentially this would be hung on the wall. It's a little pouch, and so wall pockets come in a lot of different shapes and sizes, and they were definitely a way to decorate your home. Using beadwork like that really helped show that you were doing well as a family. You could afford to display beautiful beaded items, and wall pockets could be used to hold almost anything. Like now I wish I had one for my cell phone.
Yeah. Oh. What a great idea.
Yeah. So this one is a nice example of some of the earlier bead colors as well. So a lot of these colors are hard to find nowadays. So this particular sort of dusty rose, and it's called greasy yellow in the center. But these types of beads you can't really find anymore. So a lot of people, when they're doing reproductions for museums and that, they really struggle to find and match some of these earlier colors.
And I can see that some of these beads have actually rusted out.
Yeah, there's a few of these metal faceted beads, and you can see the ones, especially in the leaves here, they've completely rusted out.
Yeah.
And there's a few up in the flower petals up here that still have a little bit of a sheen left to them.
That's right, yeah.
But that's sort of the trouble when you're taking care of composite artifacts. So artifacts that have more than one material type. You've got to sort of balance the conservation needs for the whole while addressing certain issues. So we've got the glass beads, all these colored beads are glass. The metal beads, then you've got velvet. So you're dealing with many different components that make the whole. And so the best way to conserve that sometimes is at the sacrifice of other parts, right?
Yeah. One of the pieces that Amelia had wanted in the exhibit was the Deed of Surrender, a document that outlines the sale of Rupert's Land from the Hudson's Bay Company to what would become Canada. The Deed of Surrender outlines the specific territories that would be covered in the transfer, how the transfer would occur, and for what cost. 3.9 million square kilometers of land were purchased for only £300,000. This document is kept at the National Archives in the United Kingdom, and due to timelines, it could not be brought over for the Legacies of Confederation exhibit. So how often does something like that happen, that another country has a piece of Canada's history in their collection?
Probably more often than we think, particularly due to our sort of colonial past. So there's a lot of things that I think are important to Canadians that might be over in England. There's definitely really great things that belonged, that were made here in Canada, or what became Canada, that are in museums over in the UK from fur traders who came over and then they brought their collections back home. Yeah. So there's lots of ways to get a taste of Canada, not in Canada.
For natural history, because we didn't have a museum here, an official museum here in Manitoba for quite some time, at least a natural history museum, a lot of our collections are from early collectors, just private citizens, but official collecting expeditions were frequently mounted by larger institutions. So the Smithsonian, for instance, in the United States, mounted several major expeditions, and they have a fair bit of material from Western Canada.
Wow. So bringing it back here, what is it about the Legacies of Confederation exhibit that is so important for both the Manitoba public and the Canadian public to know?
I think what's so important is that we give the Manitoba perspective. So a lot of museums are going to be doing, because this is our 150th exhibits, and our exhibit really takes it from a Manitoba focus. We're the Manitoba Museum. And I think it's important for a lot of Manitobans to come and re-educate themselves on what was happening here, and really what did it mean to become part of Canada, and what does that mean today? And I think it does a really great job of blending the human and natural history. I know I learned a lot from working with our natural history curators just about the impacts on the natural environment as well.
I think that's the real message that we need to get across. And the Legacies exhibit itself is a great place to show how each of humans and nature have influenced one another. And it's a great opportunity to sort of reflect on where we were, sort of where we went and where we are today with a lot of those relationships, both between peoples, but also with the natural environment.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.